Welcome to the Defiant Podcast. The Internet of Money is being built with blockchain technology and without banks. We call it DeFi, short for decentralized finance. And this is where you can hear the builders and users of this cutting-edge world tell their stories firsthand. I'm your host, Camila Russo. In this week's episode, we talk with Varun Kumar and Pranay Mohan from Hashflow, a new decentralized exchange that wants to unbundle Uniswap. What this means is they want to keep the non-custodial side and the liquidity pools, but instead of finding prices with smart contracts and a formula, they use market makers, applying their highly specialized strategies and algorithms behind the scenes. Anyone can become a market maker, and some may open their pools so that others will be able to share their capital in exchange for a portion of trading fees. Their bet is that they will be able to combine machines and humans in just the right way to provide cheaper rates at lower gas prices. We talk about their recent launch, their upcoming token, and more broadly, we dive into their big vision for Hashflow and DeFi. And it's that one day, all of the world's liquidity will flow through open networks. They explain why they didn't build on Layer 2. And it seems like these founders are cautious enough about the state of scaling solutions that they decided to hold off until they're fully convinced. We also got philosophical, talking about the history of money and how crypto allows us to break away from a debt-based system that's forced upon us into a voluntary incentives-based design where each community can choose and experiment with monetary theory and policies and manifest that into code. But we start at the very beginning with how Varun, an aerospace engineer, and Pranay, a chemical engineer, first got into crypto. Before we get to it, here's a word about our sponsors. Kyber's Dynamic Market Maker, or DMM, is the first decentralized exchange designed to react to market conditions to optimize fees, maximize returns, and provide extremely high capital efficiency for liquidity providers. It aims to be a game changer for DeFi. Depositing tokens to earn fees is also fast and simple, with this liquidity easily accessible by dApps, aggregators, or other users. Visit dmm.exchange now. Don't let high gas costs keep you out of Ethereum. At Balancer, you can trade all you want and get most of the gas costs back in your pocket. In their new BAL for Gas campaign, traders are receiving 6 figures worth of BAL tokens every week. And with V2 just around the corner, Balancer is becoming the one-stop shop for DeFi liquidity. Balancer V2 brings stable pools and weighted pools tightly integrated under a single protocol, flash loans, lending via asset managers, and much more. Check it out at balancer.finance. Check out Kraken, where you can earn additional rewards by staking some of your favorite DeFi assets. With more than 1 billion in crypto staked, including 350,000 ETH, Kraken has paid out 27 million worth of rewards to their clients. Payouts are twice a week, and you can earn up to 20% annually. Sign up today at kraken.com and start earning some of the most popular DeFi assets, including Polkadot, Uniswap, Aave, and more. Enzyme provides an easy way to build, scale, and monetize DeFi investment strategies. If high gas prices are shutting you out of DeFi, fear not. Enzyme is now running a gas subsidy program. The app makes it easy for investors to pull together on strategies, lowering costs. The Enzyme interface allows anyone to trade, lend, deposit to AMM pools, farm, stake, and more. It is a non-custodial solution and allows for real-time reporting, security, and transparency. Sign up today on enzyme.finance. Experience DeFi. Deposit, earn, and borrow on Aave. Aave is a decentralized, open-source, and non-custodial liquidity protocol to earn interest on deposits and borrow assets. Deposit and start earning interest in real time directly in your wallet, and swap any of your deposited assets at any time to get some of the best deals on the market. Aave protocol liquidity pools are now available on Ethereum and on the sidechain Polygon. Head over to app.aave.com to get started today. Here we are. All right. Great. So Varun and Pranay, welcome to the Defiant podcast. I'm so glad you could join me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yes, let's do it.
Happy to be
Yay.
here.
This is the first
Awesome.
Zoom podcast. I like it. It's
Awesome. Good to
Joe
hear.
Rogan on virtual.
Glad to be the first interview. So Arun Kumar is the founder and CEO of Hashflow, and Pranay is the head of product at the company. And the Hashflow is a new decentralized exchange, which by the time this episode is out, will have just launched. What's unique about it is that unlike most DeFi dexes, it doesn't use smart contracts to determine prices. Instead, it leverages market makers to achieve competitive rates at lower liquidity, or at least that's the goal that they're aiming to achieve. So we'll definitely dig into this innovation in a few minutes. But first, I want to get to know you guys better because you have really interesting stories yourself. So. Varun, if you want to start with your background and what got you into crypto, and then Pranay, I would love to hear your story.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and I'm super excited to be here. So yes, I am the founder and chief entertainment officer at Hashflow. So I provide entertainment value. So that's it. Yeah, the story is quite interesting. We were talking about this previously. So before crypto, obviously, I was an Erasmus student. I was studying my PhD at Stanford, and I ended up never doing my PhD and joining the industry and becoming a big boy. And then in the interim, in the course, I think I met a friend called Rick Burton, who in a hot tub. And that that kind of set the premise for my journey into crypto.
That set the tone pretty well.
Yes. So it was one of those things in San Francisco, right, where we're sitting there, and Rick's like, you should look into Ethereum. If you're building a satellite system, I'm pretty sure you can figure out Solidity. And I'm like, that sounds interesting, but where do I begin, right? And then that's kind of how the discussion started. And then it went into the whole notion of money and such. Mm-hmm. And then that took me down the rabbit hole, just the discovery of how money works. My first realization was I had no idea how money works. I'm like, okay, money is something that grows in the farm, I reckon, but turns out that's not the case. So that took me on the rabbit hole, which we can talk about just after Pranay gives his introduction. And then I think it's an interesting story of how the dots connect and how one thing led to the another, and that led to finally what we see Hashflow today. But yeah, Pranay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, my background is not as entertaining, but my background is somewhat similar to Varun's in that I also come from a hard engineering background. I studied chemical engineering and started my career in oil and gas and CPG, or consumer packaged goods. Mm-hmm. And I think the inflection point for me to start migrating into tech and software was in 2013 when the Snowden revelations came out. I was working on a project at Frito-Lay to make the best potato chip. And I'm not kidding, that was literally my project to make potato chip slices more standardized so that at the margins, Frito-Lay could save millions of dollars. And wow. So when the Snowden leaks happened, I kind of the ennui of what I was experiencing as a potato chip engineer kind of bubbled up to the surface. And the kind of what Snowden shined the light on in terms of the surveillance dragnet that all of us were a part of made me realize that the frontier no longer existed in the physical world, that it had moved to the digital realm. And if I was going to play any role in dealing with the human rights challenges that'll emerge in the next 100 years, I need to move to software. I need to become a technologist. And so that catalyzed that movement into tech. But like every kind of aspiring young techie, I ended up at big tech companies putting dog filters on people. And so in 2017, when the whole crypto boom happened, I started reading up on it, getting more interested. And in 2018, I helped a friend host a conference where I met some really brilliant people in this space. So like people like Olaf Carlson-Wee from Polychain, Jutta Steiner from Parity, Izzy Meckler from Mina. And I realized, okay, this isn't just virtual currency trading. It's not just speculation. There are like these really brilliant people building some really cool shit in this space. And so I finally found like I had found my Rebel Alliance. And that's what kind of put me into that proverbial rabbit hole. And now it's a mind virus. I can't think about anything else. So that's how I'm here chatting with y'all.
Nice. And so how did you two meet?
We met at the Stanford Blockchain Conference last year, discussing philosophy of money, right? So I was telling Pranay about the journey of why I got into crypto. I think TLDR I think the realization that essentially money in its current form, what we call the fiat money, is a modern form of slavery. And moving away from a debt-based monetary system to that of a user-based incentive design choice was a powerful narrative for me to look into this in the crypto in general, right? To take a step back, or maybe take a few steps back, right? If you go all the way to bartering and think of that as a giant mesh network of people trading items with each other. That's the most primitive, fundamental form of trading, where humans are trading items with each other, and they have some value attached to it, but really it's just goods changing hands. And then eventually what happened is some commodities became more prominent or were traded more often than the others. In fact, we started seeing a pattern where some commodities became the standard through which all trades started taking place. So we could say that the technology of money was discovered, where there was an incentive for most people to own certain items and use them to trade other goods, right? So this, you could see this transition from a mesh network to a multi-centric but distributed system, where some commodities became the money, right? But then we realized that, well, this is great, but if you want to scale this to geospatial regions across continents to conduct trade, scaling physical money is kind of hard, right? So the way we solved it we overcame the physical constraints of commodity money is by inventing something called currency, which we can think of as a layer 2 scaling solution to the underlying hard money, where you had these custodians emerge who would keep your money in custody and then issue claim check that could be used to redeem the underlying money. And this paper could be used easily to scale across different regions, where institutions would recognize these bills and they will give you the money that's sitting there. Right? So this could be seen as the first fundamental modern form of banking system, where institutions would issue you claim checks that you could use to scale, and then they will keep money in custody, right? So which eventually led to, we can talk about John Law system later, but then even before, fast forward 1600s to 1900s, what we saw as the gold standard until 1913 when Federal Reserve became a thing. So it's almost interesting when we were talking about this. I see like the issuance of the emergence of Federal Reserve, I almost see that as a forced network update on the system to move away from gold standard to what we today call fiat, right? Where with gold standard, we had currency backed by money, where money was gold and currency was essentially a dollar bill, a claim check on underlying money. But the moment you move away from that, you change or you get rid of the money plane and currency plane and merge them into one. That's called fiat, right? So which is essentially what we had after Bretton Woods and after 60s that we use today, where by fundamental design, it has to be borrowed into existence. And then you as a network user of the US network is forced to pay rent for its usage in the form of taxes and fees. But the only way for you to pay that rent in the same currency that you borrow is to borrow more. So the only way you could do that is by borrowing more from the system. As a result, it's a perpetual debt-based cycle or infinite regression. There's no point of time where the user would be truly debt-free. Really, the only person who wins in the system is the one who controls the system, right? So it's a zero-sum game. And with crypto, what was interesting to me is we actually get to break that wheel. We get to go away from a debt-based system that is essentially forced upon you through the logic of violence to a system of user-based incentive design where you get to use the money of your choice, right? You can freely experiment with monetary theory and policies and manifest that into code, and anybody can have the choice to use the money they want to use, right? So which is kind of what inspired me to get into crypto. And I think that was a discussion we were having. And then we were like, okay, I think we kind of agree on many, many things. We should probably work together. So it was, so that I think I spoke too much, but Pranay, you can add something there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general vibe is we both geek out about kind of what is the fabric of the monetary system that we live in. I think at the same time, I had been reading some of Ray Dalio's work, and also I follow an author, a financial advisor online, Lynn Alden, who has written some really great stuff around kind of where is the dollar now and why are we in this part of the cycle we're in? And kind of tying into what Varun is saying, like the petrodollar, the switch from Bretton Woods, the gold standard, over to what is the petrodollar system now is not only affecting the rest of the world. It's not just putting other folks in bonding to a world reserve asset. It also affects a US consumer because the US guts its own manufacturing economy in order to run a constant deficit, in order to put the dollar out into the world to service all the debt. And so having an opt-out, having an alternative to the system gives you a lot of hope. It kind of takes something that feels irredeemable and gives you a pathway out. And so when you meet like-minded folks who are eager and understand kind of the bigger picture of what we're all trying to do with all this, that can look past the rugs and the scams and the hot dog tokens, it really gives you kind of this an anchor to the fact that you're working towards a 10, 20, 50, 100-year future. And you want to find people like that and work with them because you know they are anchoring to building a world that gives people more rights and more freedoms from the system that they have now.
I love this big picture on, why crypto is important and revolutionary and why the old system is broken. To you guys, what's kind of the end goal or the end state if, everything continues progressing as it has and crypto ends up kind of taking over finance? Is it kind of, do we have a single global currency that's maybe Bitcoin or ETH, or is it like multiple currencies based on like where people are using these networks? Like, how do you see this playing out if crypto were actually able to replace like the current financial system?
That's a good question. I think the way I see it is crypto is to money what internet was to communication standard back in the 90s, right? So previously something was a monopoly, and then that monopoly got disrupted, and now anybody can freely deploy. It's a free market, right? And that has been applied to the idea of money, which happens to be the biggest monopoly out there, right? So as a result, what's interesting about crypto is many of the problems you see with fiat, like deflationary currency, inflationary currency, or even like more philosophical discussions like capitalism or socialism and such constructs, they're obsolete to much degree. Or they become irrelevant if the moment you say the boundary conditions for the money plane is removed. Right? So only if you constrain everybody to a single monetary system, you have those issues. But the moment you're no longer constrained to play within the rules of one system, there could be n different systems, right? And those issues become almost obsolete or irrelevant. It's really, now you're operating in a very orthogonal frame of reference that we haven't, quite honestly, we haven't seen anything like that before. So it's hard to say. But at the same time, because there is no more one currency to rule the world system anymore, we don't need to have this notion that we need a global currency. I think the only reason we think that way is because we've been conditioned to think that dollar is the most powerful currency, and we need to think everything in terms of dollars. But the moment you see that boundary condition has been lifted, then your money is essentially under commodity, just like your phone. You can have an iPhone, you can have a Samsung, right? You can have a local phone in China, Huawei, or some phone in India, right? So you could do the same thing with money. You could have several nation states with their own currencies, or you could have a single currency. We do not know, right? But the good thing is it's a choice. It's no longer a monopoly, which was true of fiat money. That's it.
Yeah, I think the concept of removing the boundary conditions is really important, because I think it would be naive to say that like what we're building right now Bitcoin is gonna replace. I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist. It's not going to replace the dollar, and we're all going to just get on the Bitcoin standard. But the important key is realizing that optionality is what we're missing. You're kind of you're lacking choice in the current system, because this, for whatever reason, it's evolved to be this way. And I think Bucky from Cosmos talks about this a lot, like removing the dependence on one world currency and having an ecology of currencies that people can use and play with. And so I think what we are in right now is in the very early stages of exploring that whole new design space that has been guarded off, as Varun was saying. So there's a really wonderful article online called like Entering the Crypto Idea Maze that talks about like the 3 phases of crypto exploration. It starts with sound money, because that's like the rhinestone, the first thing people find when they engage with the concept of money. Then they move to the concept of open finance, or DeFi, which is beyond the money primitive, beyond just currency. What can we do with this? What other financial services can we provide? And then once you have that framework, those primitives in place, then you can move to Web3, the truly like open web, where you're using these financial primitives that you built to create a information commons that has value baked in. And so like if you tie back to what people were saying at Bretton Woods, Robert Triffin was saying this isn't going to work, like it's going to fail. We're seeing the beginning of that now. We're seeing the fraying of that dollar-based system that has made all of us prosperous. But I think we're seeing the winding down of the old story, and we're entering a new one. And so I couldn't feel more grateful to be in a position to be a part of this and play a role in shaping what that next 100-year future looks like.
Yeah, it definitely does seem revolutionary, the advent of this new Web3 system. And it feels like COVID has played kind of an accelerator role in this, with central banks just printing even more fiat currency and trying to shore up their, their slowing economies with stimulus. And that all just seems to kind of highlight how fragile the old system is, and just makes clear why open finance and crypto should be kind of taking over. So how did you guys get from these ideas into making into like what inspired Hashflow?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I think last year we were tinkering around with the idea of just regular L2s, and then should we build a layer 2 scaling system to scale finance, or what do we solve, right? So because clearly Uniswap was a winner. I think Pranay has a good insight into that, of how Uniswap led to the whole DeFi market impetus. And then how we Pranay, you want to take that question actually?
Yeah, I mean, so look, like we had DeFi summer, right? Cami, I watched your interview with Jim Bianco, and it's like super cool to see somebody from the TradFi world that is so psyched and being essentially a hype man for DeFi, right? And a lot of that was possible thanks to DeFi summer, the launch of Uniswap V2, and it catalyzing kind of the basic economic primitive in DeFi, which is being able to trade assets. Without that Lego block, you're not able to build anything on top of that. So that Lego block had to reveal itself in order for us to have this like vibrant ecosystem that we have now. And so when we were thinking about like, what could we build? What is the set of possibilities of things here? One thing we realized is a lot of the motivations behind DeFi Summer, the earliest adopters were ideologues. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Like a lot of us that come to this space anchor to this idea of decentralization, that this is the core tenet and that's what matters. And so when we explore the design space, we start off at the very end of the continuum of decentralization. We've seen what's gone wrong in the centralized world, so we got to build the most absolute decentralized version of it. And that's what Uniswap essentially represents. If you think about the design space of any type of exchange from decentralized to centralized, at one end you have the perfectly always on AMM that acts as like an asset vending machine. It's a token robot where you go in, you put one token and another one pops out. You don't have to talk to anybody. The vending machine pricing is a little fuzzy, but you know you're going to get a token out. On the other hand, you have something like Coinbase or Binance, where you have an order book, a centralized order book that runs on Coinbase's server. You don't get self-custody, and all your transactions are intermediated by Coinbase. You don't have much insight into the settlement. And so that represents the other end of the pole. But there's this whole like middle space of designs that is relatively underexplored, because as we were saying, we're just so early. And so one thing that we were seeing is maybe let's look at that Uniswap side. Let's start at the Uniswap side of the decentralization continuum, of the exchange continuum, and see what can we unbundle, what can we pick out of here and take from the more centralized side and build it better for end users. Software engineers have this saying, there's no good or bad, there's only trade-offs. So what is a trade-off that Uniswap has made that may offer some other properties that users could benefit from? And one of these things is the pricing. So one pattern we kept seeing is every like week there was a new curve. Like Uniswap had a curve, and then stable swaps came out, and then you had these new AMMs that use oracles to improve the curve. But everything was just fidgeting with the curve, right? What if we just got rid of the curve? Like, why do we need that pricing to happen on chain? Like, maybe you lose some quality of always on, but what if you can have that pricing happen off chain and then bridge it on chain, right? You can potentially avoid doing that computation on chain. You avoid anchoring to some programmatic pricing algorithm that you have to lock in a smart contract. And you can tap into the rich world of data that exists off chain when you price assets. And so I think that was the key kind of insight that led to Hashflow. I don't want to keep rambling, so I'll pass it to Varun.
No, not at all. Because I think we also ended up interviewing a bunch of other market makers who traditionally market make on CeFi. Like, why haven't you guys been doing DeFi market making? I mean, regulatory concerns are one, but what else? And I think one of the big things that kept coming up is we don't want to be constrained to X times Y equals K, right? So if you're spending tons of capital every day or time or compute hours to figure out the best pricing for an asset, then we don't want to be limited in what we could do in terms of how can we market make. So really what I was hearing is we need more granular control on how we price assets, and that could improve the general market structure. And from a user standpoint, they care about simplicity. They just want to go there and enter a number and get the vending machine experience. So what we saw is what we want to do is marry the whole price discovery aspect of market makers with the vending machine aspect of consumer demand. And if you can bridge those two things, then we have Hashflow, right? So which kind of what, if you are using Hashflow right now since yesterday, you will notice that it is very much like, it feels like Uniswap, but from a pricing standpoint or from a gas consumption standpoint, it's extremely efficient. And obviously the way the quotes are coming from, we are basically interfacing with people who've been perfecting the pricing strategy for the last 100 years. Right,
So for listeners who might not be aware, this formula that Varun and Pranay were alluding to, X times Y equals K, that's the like famous Uniswap formula for pricing. And so instead of using that formula and that pricing curve, what you guys do is have market makers come up with the best price, the best quotes for different tokens, basically.
Yeah, right. Because by doing so, you also are no longer requiring as much capital in the contracts, right? And you also don't see many of the other issues you would typically run into as a function of the curve, right? So obviously the trade-off, like Pranay said, is it may not be on all the time, but on the other hand, you're able to get better pricing and you're able to deploy your capital in a much more efficient manner, where you are essentially using your smart contracts to deploy or maintain your inventory and then quote against it and sign that with your public-private key combo. So that way you're always able to verify that in fact the market maker was the one who signed the quote. And from a user standpoint, it's extremely permissionless. Or maybe if I'm getting too technical, maybe Pranay, you could put on your professor hat and break it down to make it a bit more audience friendly.
Happy to. Yeah. I think the metaphor that has worked best when I've talked to people or explained it is it's like an OTC desk on chain. So changing what OTC means from meaning over the counter, which I don't think anybody actually goes to a counter anymore, to mean over the chain, right? So you can show up at the Hashflow app, and just like Uniswap or SushiSwap, you type in what asset you want and the volume of the asset you're swapping, and you get that vending machine experience. The number comes back. But what's happening under the hood is you're sending an RFQ, a request for quote, to Hashflow, which then farms it out to market makers. And then market makers respond back with a quote for the assets that you requested. And when that quote comes back to the user, they can choose whether to accept it or just let it expire. If they accept it, then the signed quote is submitted on chain to Hashflow smart contracts, and the transaction just settles just like magic. So you keep the self-custodial aspect, you keep the decentralized settlement, and you have that very easy and simple user experience. But what's happening behind the scenes is there's a lot of market makers with algorithms that bake into the quote, like historical asset prices, volatility, maybe sentiment analysis, things that people have been doing in the traditional finance space for so long. All of that is happening under the hood and giving you a very bespoke quote. And some of the benefits of this is that the price is much more granular. It's fine-tuned based on the conditions of the market that you can't observe on-chain. And additionally, because you're settling this quote and not having to compute that price on-chain, the gas is much, much lower as well. So in an L1 world where we're constantly dealing with like $100 gas fees, if you're able to send a transaction with $50 gas cost, then yeah, and you get the same swap experience, then why not?
And so backstage, like what are market makers doing? Like how do they come up with better quotes? Like are they going to like arbitraging with other dexes, or like how does that happen?
So typically they don't disclose their strategies. That's their moat, right? So in fact, many of the big hedge funds and market makers are basically the way they make money or living is by having these proprietary algorithms that they use to get edge on others in the trading world, right? So as a result, allowing them to deploy those same strategies here or something similar makes for a much more competitive market, right? So if especially they can do it freely, and versus, because what's interesting is with the AMM model, you've got pools where any lazy LP can contribute capital, and then your smart contract acts as the market maker, which takes that money and then it does market making and gives you a quote, gives you a price, right? So as a human, you're not really setting a price; you're just giving capital and then waiting as a sitting duck to be arbitraged by somebody else, right? And your contract will always give you a quote based on the inventory of assets it has, right? So has its pros and cons, but then to focus more on the difference, in this case, what we're doing is instead of having anyone give you a capital, you're basically putting capital, but you're also giving a quote on top, right? That's the primitive model. Now, what could be interesting, although, is if there's a world where market makers start creating public pools where they bring their pricing strategy, but people can contribute capital to the pool, it almost becomes a where you let LPs or lazy LPs meet best prices or best price makers, right? And then it actually allows for a new way to scale things, right? So then obviously the thing is about how can we make the system more trustless, right? And that is something we will announce in the next iteration of Hashflow on how we are going to achieve that, right? But the fundamental idea is price discovery is usually proprietary, but that's also the secret sauce that leads to better pricing and better market structure.
So you can still provide liquidity to Hashflow, like that's still open, and you can earn kind of LP fees from providing liquidity?
Yeah, you can create your own pool and you can start giving us quotes, right? So you could do that. And there is like few pools where you can actually also have other people contribute to your pool and then you do market making, right? So and then you basically split the rewards pro rata based on equity ownership of the pool. So
okay.
I don't know if that makes sense, or Pranay, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think the key is that if you know the market maker, if the market maker has a good reputation and believe that they can give you good yield, then it's possible for you to unbundle the capital allocation and the pricing. So Hasib Qureshi of Dragonfly, who's a lead investor in Hashflow, had a really great article called Unbundling Uniswap, where he breaks down kind of like what are the core components that make up Uniswap's magic. And one of those is permissionless inventory. So allowing people, liquidity providers, retail LPs, to go dump tokens in a liquidity pool. And now you have a virtualized counterparty, right? Like you don't have one person providing the assets and another person pricing. You have a crowdsourced inventory pool, and then the smart contract prices for you. But if you do have a proprietary trading algorithm, you've spent a lot of money like harvesting all this data, and you have the secret sauce, and you're getting great yield on it. Capital is a commodity these days. Like you don't need to open up your pool to other people. But if you are an upstart market maker and it's like a Kaggle or something, right? So like for data science, if you have some type of proprietary algorithm that you think will beat the rest of the competition, but you don't know where to access capital, you can't find the liquidity, you can open up your pool and get other people to take LP shares in your pool and say, hey, we're gonna offer really great quotes and we're gonna get yield, and I just need you to help me bootstrap this pool that we're starting together. So anything is possible, but it really depends on what is the profile of the market maker that is spinning up the pool. Is it somebody who just wants to bring their pricing and they know where they can find capital? Or is it an upstart that needs a bootstrapping for that capital?
Oh, interesting. So you may be opening like a whole new space for kind of DeFi innovation and yield, like people who want to become like more specialized market makers.
But yeah, so perhaps instead of just relying on yield from, let's say, a sushi soft pool, now you can actually see you can maybe get some yield from Galaxy's market making strategies or Genesis's market making strategies because you think they know how to price assets better than a smart contract. Right?
So you are like, anyone is able to contribute their capital to, like, say, Genesis market making pool on Hashflow,
as long as Genesis is okay with it. So
okay.
If they are open to bootstrapping more capital and they want to do it that way, then yes, they can do it. Okay. And looks like there is some interest from some of the market makers who are building on Hashflow at the moment. So that could very well be what we'll anticipate next.
Cool. And then otherwise, like, anyone is also free to create their own pool and strategy.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. And so who are the market makers that you have right now?
Are we allowed to say the names?
Yes.
Okay. Let's put it this way. I'll tell you who invested in the company, I think, and I'll deduce from that. So okay. I think one of our fundraising strategies was to have people who we think are potential customers to also invest. So obviously the round was led by Electric and Dragonfly, and then we had like IDO and Metastable and such. But then also the market making side, we had Galaxy and then DCG and Alameda and Ledger Prime and Block Tower, Wintermute, etc. So there are more names. So as a result, I think kind of gave us a pretty good initial bootstrap way to get to many of the PMMs, which was a bit of a challenge early on. But yeah. But for the full disclosure, though, I think that for the first alpha round, right now the pricing is coming from Ledger Prime, and a couple other market makers who, for legal reasons, I cannot disclose the names just yet.
Okay.
So,
how can you say how much you raised in this round?
Yes. So we did a 3.2 million round, and so it was fairly small, I reckon, if that is considered a small number. So, so I think that should be enough for us to get to the things we want to do.
Nice. And so, how big, like, how much of liquidity do you have right now?
So it's an interesting question because so right now in the alpha phase, right now we have about 500,000 in the contracts. But really, I don't think that's considered liquidity. Because I think the way I see liquidity is anything you can buy or sell, right? So as an example, in case of Airbnb, liquidity is not the number of people signing up for Airbnb. Liquidity is how many listings are available, right? So same with Craigslist.